listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Jomi.
This week on the podcast, we are talking to Skye Warren, who is a New York Times bestselling author of Dangerous Romance. Her books have sold over 1 million copies and have been translated into 5 different languages. And her latest book, Private Property, is a Jane Eyre retelling that was released March 9th.
We're really excited to talk to Skye, as not only is she a very successful indie author herself, but she is also the creator behind the Romance Author Mastermind conference, which takes place in Texas. Obviously moved to online last year, and I believe is going to be online again for 2021. This conference is focused on more established romance writers, and she likes to use it to highlight the voices of women writers. So it's a great conference. We were really interested to hear a little bit about that, a little bit of behind the scenes. And she also talked a lot about mental health and running a business and writing during a global health crisis. So it is jam-packed. We're excited for you to hear it.
And here it is. So thank you, Skye, for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So just to kick it off, can you tell our listeners a bit about yourself?
So I write contemporary dangerous romance, which is kind of what I call it, dangerous. It's steamy and suspenseful, and that's what I love to read and write. I've been writing or publishing since late 2011. So my husband, who keeps track of dates really well, he's like, "You're coming up on 10 years." He was like, "How do you feel?" I was like, "I don't know. It feels like this kind of feels like this is all I know how to do now, because before this I was in computer science," and he kept thinking I would go back to it. And now I'm like, that would be very strange for me now.
Did you always want to self-publish?
No, I actually started a different pen name. I started that I thought was going to be my actual pen name that I worked with and had books published with a few different publishers. And then I was self-publishing kind of the stuff that I thought that content-wise they would not like. It was a little bit like I guess dangerous would be the word. And I would publish that under this pen name, Skye Warren. And I didn't do any promotion for it. I didn't even start with a website or anything. And people, I just made a Gmail for it. And then people would read the books and they would message me and be like, "Please make a Facebook page, please, make a website so I can keep up with it." And it was just sort of fan driven. Whereas my other pen name that was with publishers, I was pushing so hard and I just wasn't getting the traction compared to this. So it took me a while to sort of switch my mindset where I was like, no, readers are telling me what they want. So I just have to listen. And now I write solely under Skye Warren.
So in addition to writing, you're the founder of the Romance Author Mastermind conference, which our coworker Tara has attended a few times, and she describes it as one of the biggest and best romance conferences that she's been to. What was the inspiration behind this event?
So yeah, I'm so grateful that Tara and Kobo has sponsored and supported RAM. The response has been incredible. I wanted for a few years. So I was a member of RWA, which is Romance Writers of America, since I started writing. I went to my first national conference in 2012, and it was great. It was like a whole new world in 2012 when I went for the first time and learned everything. But then going back year after year, it was kind of similar content again and again. And, and then I started, as I grew more intermediate/advanced, and I was talking with other authors, they were like, "Yeah, we do all of our learning at the bar." And, and that's why we go, and we don't really go to the workshops. And so right from there, I just had this, image of an event where you did all your learning in the classes, and then you got to meet at the bar and really just chat. And I wanted to do it for a long time. And then the first time I did it was in, 2018. So I had to plan it a year in advance. And I don't have any background in event planning at all. So that was the scary part. Had to sign, a big contract with the hotel. And I really just made it like my dream event. I was like, what would I want? And I was like, one of the things that I really want is to be as comfortable and basically as well fed as possible when I'm doing these conferences so that I can just focus on, what I'm doing and not have to worry about cause sometimes, RWA is so huge and so are the other conferences. So you just take over the hotel. So there's just this massive line at Starbucks. And so I'm always thinking, what am I going to eat? And I'm also vegetarian. So it's a little bit stressful. Are they going to have stuff for me? And I was like, I just want to be so comfortable where that is all taken care of. And so I looked around at a lot of hotels and I was like, no, the Four Seasons, this is what I want. And so I had to sign with them before I really knew if I would sell a single ticket. And now that we're on our actually booking for our 4th year and we've sold out every year, that seems obvious. It doesn't seem like a real scare. But at the time when I'm signing, this contract and I really had never sold a single ticket, I didn't know people would want this, because it is at the Four Seasons, it is sort of more expensive than some of the other ones. I also, from the outset, I think that one of the reasons why other conferences struggle to get high value content is that it's based on who's coming already and would you be willing to spend just an hour of your time coming to talk and not necessarily put a lot of time into the presentation, not necessarily share your secrets, that kind of thing. And so it was very important to me from the outset that we invite speakers that we want to speak. It has nothing to do with who's already attending, and also that we pay their way. And so all of those things, having a really great hotel and having, we feed them multiple times and having, where we pay the speakers way meant that the cost would be elevated. But I was just like, this is what I personally want from a conference. And that's sort of how I think books have worked for me, like the books that I would write under my Skye Warren name were the books that I most wanted to read. And so, I found that readers responded to that. And luckily enough, other authors also responded to this idea of what I would want from a conference. So what sets it apart is that it is only for intermediate and advanced level authors. The focus is on romance authors. We have had other authors attend and even speak where they write in other genres, and so we do allow that, but you do have to have a minimum of a certain number of books published to even be considered for an invite. And that just keeps the standard high. You're not going to get to the Q&A and have people raising their hand and, asking intro questions. So, yeah.
Was there any speaker that you had that you were really excited about, or have been some standout presentations you've seen at the conference?
So there are usually, one of the other things that we do is that because we focus so much on creating great content, it's actually a single track conference. So everyone attends the same talk. So there's no picking. You don't have to decide, do I want to miss this or whatever. You don't really have to miss anything. But found is that it elevates the conversations outside of the conference. So outside of the session. So everyone, because you've been to the same session. So at another conference, you might be catching up, what did you go to? Was that good or whatever? And now you can just use that session as a jumping off point for your conversation and say, okay, what did you think about what she said? And then, and the conversation is like that. I really, because I created this as my dream conference, really every single speaker who has come has been because I brainstorm who would I love to see speak. So I can't say that they're all because I pick them because I love them, but some standouts that fans or, attendees have just commented again and again is Lauren Blakely, C.D. Rice, they were Whitney G, they were in the first year, second year, Laurel and Page was great. And then in this previous, this digital conference that we just did in 2020, we had J.R. Ward, we had Jennifer Armentrout. There was a great talk about Theodora Taylor, or by Theodora Taylor, who talked about universal themes, which is an interesting way to think about sort of tropes and things like that. And so everyone just loved that one. And because it was digital, people did get to rewatch them, which was, some people even preferred the digital format because of that.
That's awesome. One of the things that Tara mentioned is that you make a big effort to uplift women writers and women generally at the conferences, that you only have women speaking. Is that right? How do you think that the indie landscape has changed publishing and opportunities for women?
Yeah, that was one of my, and I don't mean to, I was a member of RWA for a very long time and only recently lapsed my membership because of some of the other issues that they were facing. But but the fact is, sexism exists in every industry. I mean, when I was in computer science, I was really, the company that I worked for, the only other women who worked there were in HR and secretaries. So, and so it was great for me to go to enter the romance genre, publishing, and there are so many women. But still, even in that situation, whenever, sort of men can still get that preferential treatment to be speakers at RWA. So we'll have, these massive sellers go sort of, relatively unappreciated, I think. And then, sort of a man who, by the numbers sells less, giving these advanced level paid talks. So they would sort of pay the men to come and speak to us, while the women would be like, well, if you want to do it for free, you can do it. And, there are just a lot of examples of that, of, certain topics, like, 2 lawyers worked on the Cockygate case, and the person who was invited to speak was the man on that team and not the, the woman, and just situations like that. And so what I love about the romance genre is that it is primarily written by women for women. And I really wanted an event that would just celebrate that. And so we do only invite women to speak, and we absolutely allow men to come and attend. In particular, we appreciate when, men who write romance, since it is like own voices, so they're absolutely welcome to attend, but it's going to be, in the audience.
You mentioned earlier that you kind of adjusted your writing based on the feedback you were getting from your readers. So I'm just wondering, how do you incorporate kind of their ideas or inspiration or what they want to see from you next, and then into your own plans that you have for what you want to write, if you do that even? Maybe.
Right. I definitely like to explore, with my writing, I like to explore something, sort of a new take on every book, like a new sort of taboo or a new sort of kink or a new sort of angle. So like my next book that's coming out is Private Property, and it's a Jane Eyre retelling. So it's got like the brooding billionaire Annie. It's a modern take, and so I need that, like, creatively, something new to explore. But, I think my readers definitely constantly looking for an edge. And I think that, it's a fine line, because I think, like, with Apple saying that Steve Jobs quote, they aren't necessarily going to ask you for what they want. You kind of have to see what sells and be like, and just really think about it. Like, what can I deliver that will feel new? Like the same but different is something we talk about a lot, like the same but different, like for covers, again, they want it to be close, but still feel fresh. And I don't know if there's really like a good formula for that. But one of the things that I've noticed, like just in talking like with my friends as well, my author friends, is that when we're like going through ideas, let's say, especially back when we could have writing retreats, and we would go through ideas and, they'd be like, well, I could write this. And they'd talk about it. And then I could write this. And they say, and they sort of light up and just start talking about it. That's the idea. That's always the idea, because your passion is going to come through so much stronger. So I try to look for that when I write as well, even if it is a little bit off brand. I don't want to go too far, but I just have to feel that excitement, that like lit up feeling.
And I'm curious on kind of your marketing strategy. Has it changed over the past 10 years, or have you kind of continued and you found what works the best for you in enticing readers to read your books?
I guess this also ties into your previous question, because what I do want to say, though, is when I think about what readers want, the first thing that I will do is I will open up like Book Report or Tracker Box that has my sales numbers, and I will look at the spikes and the sales of each. And so when I think about what readers want, I'm looking at sales numbers. I'm not looking at, maybe I post in my Facebook group, what do you guys want me to read next? I can ask, or what write next. I can ask that question, but that's not what I'm really taking as data. I'm taking the sales numbers as data of what they really want. Marketing wise, I started doing Facebook ads in the very beginning, I think, of 2015. And it really completely changed my business. Like before then was, just very much, I was basically not making as much as I was, when I was a programmer. The dips between releases would be so low that I would really worry about them. And then I would start to, the negative part about that is you start to feel stressed, like maybe I should write faster because then there won't be as much skips, And so advertising in general, but Facebook ads in particular definitely changed both my writing experience. I mean, and honestly, my life. Like I went from like a low, sort of 5 figures or mid 5 figures until, and now making 6 and 7 figures and writing less than I did then. So, because if you can keep the, ads running and making, doubling your money, then you can write less. And you can sort of relax that speed and have less pressure on yourself artistically and just have more time to write the books that you really want. Have more flexibility to take a little bit of creative risk on your series that, you weren't sure it's going to go well. And so, yeah, I also actually do run a Facebook ads course, or at least I've run it 2 or 3 times before, and I might do it again later this year. But, and that's one of the big topics that we cover at RAM. And one of the reasons why I wanted to cover it because I think that a lot of authors really, even when they are, quote, advanced, they might have, sometimes you have career authors who've been writing for 30 years and have this huge backlist, but it isn't moving and they don't necessarily know how to get it moving beyond BookBub. And that was one of the hard parts because, so I love BookBub, and BookBub is actually also, I use them for everything. I do featured deals, I do pre-orders, I do ads, I do all of the things with them. And they're also a great sponsor of RAM. But I would see in these Facebook groups where authors would be like, yeah, my only marketing strategy is to get a BookBub. And then the worst part is then, 6 months later or a year later, they'll say, hey, BookBub won't approve me for anything. So it's like, that's their whole marketing strategy. And now it's gone. And so my whole idea with the Facebook ads class and with RAM is like, let's build ourselves this dashboard. And I sort of envisioned this sort of like spaceship, dashboard where there's all these buttons and levers. Like, let's build this marketing dashboard for us where we have all of these levers, and you don't have to use them all at one time, certainly, but you can have them available to you. And so that way, if you aren't getting traction on your ads, or if you aren't getting a BookBub deal, you have something that you can go to, and you're not just taking a nosedive with your sales.
So leading on a little bit from what you said earlier, I think that the unpredictable income of a writer, especially when you're starting out, I imagine can have quite an impact on your creativity and your ability to just relax and write. And it takes a little bit of security to feel like you can be creative, right? And we wondered, do you have any strategies for coping with that? And the same kind of goes with everything that happened last year and is still happening with the pandemic and everything else. I think a lot of people have struggled to be creative.
Yeah. I think one of the things when I started my business, or when I started writing and publishing, I did have a PayPal account that was kind of like my business account, but the money would flow into my personal account, with my husband and everything. And then sometimes I'd have to pull money out to pay for a big editing job or something like that. And, and at some point he's like, you should really be writing this out of like a business bank account. You should get a business bank account. And I really resisted because probably, well, for one thing, you have to go walk into a bank, and who wants to do that? But so I resisted, and he was like, just, you got to do it. You got to do it. So I do it, and you transfer over. So like Amazon and Kobo and everything is now depositing into my business bank account. And then like a few months later, 2 months later, he's like, hey, are you going to put anything into our personal account? Because you haven't done that. And it just kind of was a wake up call for me to not treat everything that my books make as personal income. That yes, I can move money into our personal account, obviously did at that time when I realized, but I didn't have to put 100% of it in, I could hold stuff back, one of the things, and I do understand this completely, but, when people think about doing my Facebook ads class, or when people think about doing RAM, one of the things is they kind of need to ask their husbands or their spouses about the expense. And, everyone runs their business differently. Sometimes their spouses are involved. But, for me, I just, want to say as the CEO of your business, you can choose to make this expense and maybe save up, have some money sitting there, and spend on ads and things. And, particular ads, it's something that would be very hard to ask every sort of week if you're running continual ads. So, just your business makes money and keeps some of that money and pays only some of that to you. It can be hard to face if you are like, I wanted the full amount and I sort of needed it to live, but it's also a more realistic way to look at what your business can earn you and still grow. Oh, and then the pandemic. Yes. I mean, it's so hard. We were chatting about this, but well, I live in Texas, and we just had the blackouts. We lost power for a little while. We lost water for a little while. We also had a scare where we had a fireplace on in our bedroom and woke up in the middle of the night with a carbon monoxide alarm. And so on the one hand, it's been hard to really sort of complain or take it seriously as a major issue because we're sitting here in our house, relatively comfortable, relatively safe. Other people in Texas had it worse with much more days without power or water. But on the other hand, it's like my son is going through some, and me as well, just, it'll keep coming up. Like, wow, if we didn't have that carbon monoxide alarm, like we wouldn't have woken up. And it's like you're experiencing trauma, but nothing, it's part of you says nothing traumatic happened to you. Just get over it. But you actually did experience trauma, and you have all this, fear and adrenaline and stress response in your body because of it, and how similar that is to the pandemic itself, because, we can't leave home, or when we do leave home, we're afraid of, catching something or getting too close to people. And that sort of constant vigilance really weighs on us. And it's kind of like the hierarchy of needs. Who's the guy who did that?
I don't know, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Trying to Google it right now.
But basically you need enough food and water and shelter, right? And then
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Maslow's. Yeah. And so, we're living in that space. So on the one hand, we're like, this doesn't look like trauma. We're not being attacked by a bear. We're not, in that sort of way, but we are still thinking about survival. And so we're at that level of needs where we're thinking about survival and not, and so if those needs aren't being met, it's just very hard to get creative. I think creativity is such a nebulous thing, and I don't know if I can provide good advice because everyone is so different. But I will say, for me, what especially with the kind of fiction that I write, which is, like I said, sexy and suspenseful and emotional and see and all of these things, is that when there's something bothering me or something I'm afraid of, is that I actually lean into it with my fiction. So, if I'm worried about death, like that's going to come up in the book that I'm writing, or grief, and not living in that fear, and all of those emotions are going to come out in whatever I'm writing. Sometimes in more literal ways, sometimes more figuratively. That is what works for me. And I think because that's the way that I've always written, like it's always been the stories that I'm sort of burning to tell, which is based on sort of things that have happened to me. I think there are writers who go the opposite direction. Like, this is so heavy. I want to write something like fun and light and frothy that will just totally distract me. And I think there's totally nothing wrong with that. It's just been my experience that when I do that, because of the way that I do it, those books don't sell. Like, readers feel that my heart is not in it. So yeah, that's just been my experience. And so that is how I approach, if I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm too stressed out about the carbon monoxide alarm going off to write, like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to be like, how do I want to put this into the book? Because that's what I'm going to write about right now.
I'm curious about what your writing process is like. Are you like an outliner? Do you just kind of go with the flow? How do you approach writing? I'm
mostly a pantser, though I have recently started outlining, which is interesting. I don't know if it'll stick. Every book feels different. Like, sometimes I will write them out of order. Sometimes I'll write a lot of it on paper. Sometimes sometimes I'll outline, sometimes I won't. Or in the case of this novella I'm writing right now, sometimes I'll write like a fourth of it and then decide that is wrong and trash it and start over. So I wouldn't say that I have a really good repeatable process. I think that writing a book is, I call it an act of faith, because as soon as I finished a book, as happy and accomplished as I feel, I think to myself, that was so hard. I don't think I'm ever going to do it again. And, I'll go to my husband at various points while I'm writing a book, and I'll be like, babe, I don't think this one's going to happen. Like, I really don't think. I was like, look at this deadline. I'm not moving forward. He's just like, he's so over it. He's like, you say this every time. And I'm like, no, but this time I'm serious. Yeah. So it just feels like an act of faith because, putting down one word and thinking I'm going to have, 50,000 more of these, it just sort of feels almost impossible to me. But then somehow it happens every time.
I guess this kind of leans into the next question that we have. We kind of asked this to, we call them veteran authors, but like who've been writing for a while. But there's, what's one piece of advice that you'd give yourself if you could talk to baby author you back in 2011?
Oh gosh. I'd probably say back in 2011. I mean, it's hard because like you probably wouldn't listen to yourself.
Of course not.
You have to experience it, right? But I mean, I think that for me, really, working with publishers just was not a super great use of my time. Like it took almost more time to sort of work with them than to do things myself. I not only do make less on each book, obviously, but I also sold less on those books. So, even now there's still a struggle, like the price will drop and there's no communication. And I'm just like, it's something that I wanted to work and then it didn't. I think I could have told myself, but even when I see like baby authors in groups in that situation and, and they're like, oh, I had a couple good, self-published releases, I'm thinking I would like a deal. I mean, I don't bother telling them anything like they have to try it. And then, and I mean, obviously for a few people it works out. But for a lot of people it doesn't. And I'm like, they just have to try it. Me saying it, it's just, I mean, I don't even know. I wouldn't even listen to stuff like it looks so amazing from the outside.
I think a lot of it is probably just like the verification of having someone else say it's good, right? I think that's what it really comes down to, because I think the evidence is abundant that self-publishing is better in terms of running your own business and all of those things. But I guess it's kind of an imposter syndrome type of thing. Yeah,
that is definitely part of it. Feeling like, you got accepted, and then you see those few authors who are so successful and you think, that could be me or something like that. And, and obviously there's also the job of being on bookshelves, though that has sort of evaporated now that we can't go out. But yeah, no, I think you just have to do it. And I mean, I'm not even saying I would never take a deal again, but I just think there's really a disconnect. And some people really hate it. Well, I think I struggle with that because I think it's almost become like cool to say I hate marketing as an author. Like it's sort of proof that you are a true artistic soul because you don't like, the whole selling business. But the way that I like to think about marketing and the way that I teach it when I have a class or anything like that is that marketing is storytelling. And it's one of the big reasons why it's very hard to outsource. Because you can find someone who knows how to like literally create an ad in Facebook and change the text or whatever, but you cannot find someone who knows how to write. I mean, it's writing copy, it's writing a version of that blurb that will sell the book, and or it's creating an image that appeals to the as Jennifer Lynn Barnes said, like the id, what it is about this story that makes people need to click right now. So marketing is storytelling, and from that standpoint, every great marketer is highly creative, and there is no one who can be more creative about your books than you.
We've been talking to a lot of authors recently, and a lot of them say that you keep updating your synopsis to like get new attention in new search engines, but like you don't have that ability when it's a publisher, because from like working on a bookstore side, they maybe update that once, if that, maybe if you get a new cover 4 years from now. So that like updating makes a big difference. And I feel like publishers aren't able to do that.
That's part of the upside of ads is, I mean, the big part, and this is the part that most people think about, is that you're driving traffic to your book and that traffic can convert. But the other part, which I think is really important as well, is that, one of the first ways I'll start creating ads is by pulling out pieces of the blurb and putting it as text. And then I'll say, okay, that performed however it did. Let me try this new text. And I try the new text. And if that performs better, if that sells the book better, why shouldn't that be on the sales page? So then I'll move it to the sales page. And, and again, for covers, it can be that way too. It's so simple to, test. And I've had covers where you get so much praise, you get people being like, I love this cover. People will message you and be like, I love this cover. And then you actually run it in tests and it doesn't click, the clicking isn't there. And I'm like, it doesn't matter I do want to love my covers, but but it doesn't matter if I get messages from people saying that they love the cover if I'm losing half the sales every time they go to the sales page and they say, I don't like this, this book cover as much. So it's just being able to be really agile and change when, which is another reason why doing Facebook ads yourself makes the most sense, because you actually see that. It's one thing, again, like it's hard to be told things. It's easy for a PR person to come in and be like, oh, I don't like this cover. And I'll be like, well, but I did like this cover. And also my friends like this cover. So there. But once you see the actual data, like half the people, see this cover and leave compared to this other cover. And you're just like, wow. So I'm losing half the sales by choosing this cover that me and my friends like. And so it really just shows you rather than tells you what's going on.
That's actually really interesting. You would think that the one that people love is the one that they click on, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I think it's, for one thing, it's like there's an artistic angle. Like if the artistry is really good, even for something simple like a Manchaz cover, if the artistry is better, people will like it. People will say, oh, I love this cover because it looks better than a very plain Manchaz cover or something like that. The other thing they tend to say is, this is why you should never ask any sort of group of readers which cover you like best, is because they tend to say covers that look outside your genre look better because they're so bored of them. If someone has 500 Manchaz covers on their Kindle and they see an object cover, this is just an example because object covers actually work really well for me. But they see an object cover and they're like, oh, that's so great. It's so original. It's so interesting. But in reality, if they have 500 Manchaz covers on their Kindle, that means that's what they click. And so the other thing is that your readers are much more likely to say they prefer whatever you had before, just because that's how they found you. That's why they, so this is why, I like the data of looking at what do new readers click on? What do they buy? Is really, what I want to put on my book going forward.
I guess that kind of goes with your brand, right? You've settled on a brand. Has your brand changed over the course of 10 years, or have you kind of maybe adjusted it here and there?
Funny because object covers do work really well for me. Mm-hmm. And it does depend a lot on the object covers. Like I will try so many objects. It's not just, it almost seems easy. Like, oh, you're just going to put a feather, you're going to put a violin, and you just like, there's a million pictures of that, but a million pictures are not going to perform well. So it does take a lot of work to get to good object covers. But I mean, sometimes it's frustrating just because I'll follow these really great photographers and I'll be like, oh my God, he's like super hot. And then the pictures actually cost so much. And I have paid for Diamond in the Rough. Right now he's on there. But I paid like $3,500 for his picture, which is the most I'd ever paid for a picture. But I was like, but this is the problem with authors. I'm like, that just looks exactly like the character. And he's hot, and it looks exactly like the character.
It's a great cover.
And so I got that. And then my friend was like, I don't know if this matches the style of the book that you're writing. And sure enough, I tested it against, I did try a lot of different covers, but I ended up putting a deposit photos cover that probably cost me like, $1 or $2 of images put together, and it performed better. So I launched with that cover, and then my PR person is insisting that this cover, but it's actually good for, I can use the object cover for a while, and then I can use the person cover for a while, and people can be attracted to whatever they like. And, and the book stays the same, but they discover it different ways. Yeah. She was like, Skye, you have to, he's so hot. It's just like, I was like, fine. But yeah, object covers just consistently perform better for me. It may be because sort of I think every author has breakout books, but like not just one breakout book, but like a series. This one burst me out to a new level, and this one burst me out to the next level. But one of my big breakout books, and still my best-selling trilogy, is The Pawn, and that was an object. I think it was the first object that I had done, and so now ever since then, I think something about my brand just makes them want objects. But it's getting hard because I'm like running out of objects. I was
gonna say, well, eventually it's gonna be like, I don't know what's left.
I know.
I would have thought it would be easier because there's an endless amount. I guess
I know, but it's got to be like the perfect object of appearing like sexy and like contemporary. It's also easier for some objects to look like they might be historical or paranormal or something like that. So yeah, so I'm I'm running out. It would be easier for me to just buy, because photographers are always producing great content.
Mm-hmm.
It could change, but the other thing is that I am wide, and I think that goes a little bit more into the object cover realm and also writing this kind of like dangerous romance vibe.
Well, I'm conscious of taking too much of your time, but we always like to finish with the question, what have you been loving lately? Can be a book, podcast, television show, anything that you've been enjoying.
I should probably say something really smart, some like new edition of Jane Eyre that I got, or something that would like tie into my book. But actually, what I've been loving is the show Schitt's Creek. I just started watching it, and it's hilarious. We sort of have a joke that and by we, I mean, it's mostly just my personal joke that like I'm the princess from The Princess and the Pea, which is a ridiculous story when you really think about it as a grown up. But unfortunately, I am that person. And so like I need everything to be really right. So like I identify with the mom way more than I should. I'm like, oh my God, they don't have like valet. And I mean, it's terrible. It's terrible. And then, I used to do a lot of travel back when we had signings and conferences and all of that stuff. And so I'm all like, the lounge. I want the lounge. I want the comfortable seats. I want, and now of course, it's like you get what you get and you wear a mask white. Like, this is not as fun. It's not as glamorous.
So are you ready to go back to in-person conferences when it's safe? Or
no, I really struggled with this RAM 2021 because I wanted it to be in person, even though I got great feedback about the virtual one, which was really amazing. But I was hoping that the vaccine rollout would be a little bit faster and that I could sign with the hotel. But it's just so hard to plan an event. You really need to book so far out with hotels and with services and getting all their speakers lined up. And there was so much uncertainty. So I decided to do it virtual this year. But I am now really hopeful that 2022, if we do it, then it would be in person. And I'm signed up for Book Bonanza 2022, Rare Paris 2022.
Yes, awesome.
It's like all travel all the time.
I miss it.
Yeah, so much.
So what can readers expect from you next? And then what dates are your conference for anyone who might be interested?
So Private Property comes out on March 9th. And it's, as I said, a Jane Eyre retelling, the broody billionaire with the nanny contemporary. So I'm really excited about that. And in terms of RAM, it's happening November 4th through 7th, I believe, of 2021. So it is mostly filled up with tickets, but you can, if you are interested, then you can always go to romanceauthormastermind.com and you can request an invitation. And if if we are too full for 2021, there's always 2022.
Hopefully a few of us from Kobo will be able to be there in person.
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, thank you so much for coming and for giving us your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Joni and Stephanie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in Skye Warren's books, we'll provide links in the show notes. And if you are interested in learning more about Romance Author Mastermind, we'll make sure to include a link to that as well.
This episode was produced by Stephanie McGrath and Joni DiPlacido. This episode was edited by Kelly Robotham. Music was provided by Tearjerker. Special thanks to Rachel for being our production assistant. And thank you, Skye, for being a guest on our episode.
If you're ready to start your self-publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.